I locked the door, barricaded it with a chair, and sat there, panting, the knife clutched to my chest. I didn't leave the house for 2 days. I kept the lights on, the curtains drawn, the tape locked in a drawer. Sleep came in fits, broken by nightmares of spiraling symbols and eyeless faces. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, sounded like my name being whispered. I called a realtor and told her to sell the place as is. I didn't care about the money, I just wanted out. But the tape, I couldn't leave it behind. On my last day in Pine Hollow, I drove to Carver's house, the cassette in my pocket. He was on his porch, whittling a piece of wood into something shapeless. I told him what I'd seen, what I'd heard. He didn't look surprised. "You saw it," he said, not a question. "The Whisperer." "What is it?" My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. Carver set his knife down, his eyes distant. "No one knows. Some say it's a spirit tied to the land. Others say it's older, something that was here before the trees, before the people. It takes what it wants. Marks you, calls you, pulls you in. Your dad got away, but most don't." "Why didn't he tell me?" Carver sighed. "He wanted to protect you. Thought if he stayed quiet, it'd leave you alone. But you went looking. You heard it call your name." I handed him the tape. "Burn it, please." He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and nodded. I drove back to Boise that night, the rearview mirror empty, but my nerves screaming. I kept checking, expecting to see that figure in the road, its broken limbs swaying. It never came. That was 6 months ago. I'm back in Boise, back to fixing cars, back to my routine, but it's not the same. I don't sleep much. I keep the TV on at night, drowning out the silence. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear that hum, faint and far away. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I hear my name. I checked online, trying to find anything about Pine Hollow, about the missing people. There's nothing, just a few articles about hikers lost in the 90s, no details, no follow-up. The town's barely a blip on the map. I called Carver last week, but his phone's disconnected. I don't know if he burned the tape. I don't know if it matters. Last night, I found something in my apartment, tucked behind the couch. A cassette tape, cracked plastic case labeled Pine Hollow 1993. I don't know how it got there. I don't want to know. I locked it in a drawer, but I can still hear it, even now as I type this. The hum, the whisper, my name. If you're reading this, if you find this story, do me a favor. Stay out of the pines. The hollow beneath. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because I need someone to believe me. My name's Hannah, and I'm 29, a nurse who moved to Black Creek, Montana, 2 years ago for a job at the county clinic. Black Creek's a nowhere town, population 600, surrounded by endless wheat fields and a single stretch of forgotten highway. The kind of place where the sky feels too big and the nights too dark. I thought it'd be quiet, a fresh start after a bad breakup. But what happened last winter, what I found under that gas station, changed me. I don't sleep anymore. I don't trust silence. It started with a patient, an old man named Amos Reed. He came into the clinic one November evening, shivering in a threadbare coat, his eyes wild and bloodshot. His hands were raw, like he'd been digging in frozen dirt. I was working the night shift alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. Amos wouldn't sit still, kept muttering about the hollow and the voices under the pumps. I figured he was drunk or off his meds. Black Creek had its share of eccentrics, but his fear was real, raw, like he'd seen something that broke him. "They're down there, Hannah," he whispered, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. His nails dug into my skin, leaving crescent-shaped marks. "Under the gas station on Route 12, they talk to me when I fill up my truck. They know my name." I humored him, checked his vitals, and sent him home with a referral to a psych in Billings. But his words stuck with me, burrowing into my thoughts like a splinter. The gas station, he mentioned, was the only one in town, a rundown Texaco with flickering neon signs and pumps so old they creaked when you used them. I passed it every day on my way to work, its cracked pavement and peeling paint a constant in Black Creek's gray landscape. I'd never thought much of it until Amos. A week later, I heard he was dead. Found in his truck off Route 12, engine still running, his eyes wide open, and his hands clutching the wheel. The coroner called it a heart attack, but the sheriff's deputy who came by the clinic said something else. No marks on him, he told me, his voice low. But the way he looked, like he saw something he couldn't unsee. I tried to shake it off. Small towns breed rumors, and I wasn't the type to buy into ghost stories. But that night, driving home past the Texaco, I slowed down. The station was dark, the pumps standing like silent sentinels under the sodium lights. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, though the sky was clear. I don't know why I stopped. Curiosity, maybe? Or something else. Something I can't explain. I pulled into the lot, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and sat there, engine idling, staring at the pumps. That's when I heard it. A low, rhythmic thrum, like a heartbeat pulsing through the ground. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong, like it didn't belong in the world. My skin prickled, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move near the pumps' shadow. Too tall, too thin, gone when I blinked. I told myself it was the lights playing tricks, but my hands were shaking as I drove away. How? I couldn't let it go. Amos's words, the thrum, the shadow, they haunted me. The next night, I went back. It was stupid, I know, but I needed answers. I parked behind the station, where the lot backed up to a field of dead grass, and grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar from my trunk. The station was closed, the windows dark. The only sound, the faint hum of the neon sign flickering Texaco in red and white. The air smelled of gasoline and something sour like rotting leaves. The pumps stood in a row, their hoses coiled like snakes. I walked to the one farthest from the station, where Amos said he'd heard the voices. The thrum was there again, stronger now, vibrating through my boots. I knelt down, shining my flashlight on the concrete slab beneath the pump. It looked ordinary, cracked and stained, but there was a seam, a faint outline of a trap door, barely visible under years of grime. My heart pounded. I shouldn't have been there. I should have called someone, anyone. But I wedged the crowbar into the seam and pried. The slab gave way with a groan, revealing a rusted metal hatch, maybe 3 feet square. The thrum was louder now, a deep, bone-rattling pulse. I hesitated, my breath fogging in the cold, then pulled the hatch open. A wave of damp, earthy air hit me, carrying the stench of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. Below was a ladder, its rungs slick with condensation, descending into darkness. I don't know what possessed me to climb down. Maybe it was the same thing that made Amos keep going back. The ladder creaked under my weight, and the thrum grew louder, echoing in my chest. My flashlight beam barely cut through the dark, illuminating rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. The air was thick, oppressive, like breathing through a wet cloth. At the bottom, maybe 20 feet down, was a tunnel, narrow and low, carved into the earth. The walls were uneven, etched with strange symbol spirals, jagged lines, shapes that hurt to look at too long. The thrum was deafening now, a living thing that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I followed the tunnel, my flashlight shaking in my hand, the crowbar heavy in the other. The air grew colder, the smell of blood stronger. The tunnel opened into a chamber, maybe 30 feet across, its ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was dirt, soft and wet, and in the center was a pit, perfectly round, maybe 10 feet wide. The thrum came from there, a deep, unending drone that made my teeth ache. I edged closer, my flashlight beam trembling. The pit was deep, too deep for the light to reach the bottom, but there was something down there movement, faint and fluid, like oil shifting in water. And then I heard it. My name, Hannah. A whisper, soft and dry, like leaves scraping stone. It didn't come from the pit. It came from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight catching nothing but empty air. The chamber felt smaller, the walls closer, like they were breathing. Hannah. The whisper came again, from the left now, then the right, circling me. My pulse roared in my ears, and I backed toward the tunnel, my crowbar raised. The shadows moved, not like a person, not like anything I could name, just shapes, tall and wrong, flickering at the edge of my light. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer going back, the symbols on the walls pulsing in time with the thrum. My flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering, and the whispers followed. my name over and over, in voices that weren't humansome, deep and guttural, others high and sharp, like children but cruel. I climbed the ladder, my hands slipping on the rungs, the crowbar clattering into the dark below. When I reached the hatch, I slammed it shut and dragged the concrete slab back into place, my arms burning with the effort. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, doors locked, engines screaming as I tore out of the lot. The thrum faded, but the whispers didn't. They followed me home, faint and distant, echoing in my head as I locked every door and window, drew the curtains, and sat on my couch clutching a kitchen knife. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after. I called in sick, my voice shaking as I lied about the flu. I couldn't tell anyone what I'd seen, what I'd heard. They'd think I was crazy, like Amos. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what was down there. Something old, something that knew my name, something that wanted me to come back. I tried to research the gas station, the town, anything that could explain it. Black Creek's records were sparse, but I found a mention in an old newspaper clipping from 1957 buried in the library's microfiche. A construction worker had gone missing while installing the station's fuel tanks. No body, no trace, just a note that the ground was unstable and the project was delayed. Another article from 1972 mentioned a string of disappearance struckers, mostly last seen at the Texaco. The locals called it bad luck. I knew better. I went back to the station one last time, in broad daylight, because I needed to know it was real. The hatch was still there, the concrete slab undisturbed, but the seam was tighter, like someone or something had sealed it. The thrum was gone, the air still. I didn't dare open it again. I poured salt around the pumps, a trick my grandma swore by, and left. That was 3 months ago. I quit my job, moved to Missoula, tried to start over. But it's not over. The whispers come at night, faint but clear, my name slipping through the walls of my apartment. I've seen shadows outside my window, too tall, too thin, gone when I turn on the light. Last week, I found dirt under my fingernails, black and wet, like the soil from that chamber. I don't remember digging. I drive a different route now, avoiding highways, avoiding gas stations. But I know it's still out there, under Black Creek, under the pumps, waiting. It knows my name. It knows I found it. And it's patient. If you're ever in Black Creek, filling up at that old Texaco, listen close. If you hear a thrum, a whisper, your name in the dark run, don't look back. Don't go down. The Lantern Road. I never believed in places that could watch you. Not until I found the Lantern Road. My name's Caleb Hart, a surveyor for a land development company sent to scout a forgotten stretch of land in northern Maine. The job was simple: map an old logging route for a potential resort. The client provided coordinates and a single instruction: follow the lanterns. I thought it was a quirky way to mark the trail, nothing more. But the moment I stepped onto that road, I knew I'd walked into something wrong, something that had been waiting. It started with a phone call from my boss, Karen, late on a Friday. She sounded rushed, her voice clipped. "Caleb, we got a rush job. Some rich guy wants a survey of a plot near Millinocket. Old logging road, unmarked, no name. Locals call it the Lantern Road. You're the only one free. Can you be there by morning?" I wasn't thrilled. Millinocket was a 6-hour drive from my place in Bangor Butte. The pay was double, and I needed the cash. She emailed me the coordinates and a grainy photo of a dirt path lined with rusted lanterns. Their glass cracked, their frames twisted. The caption read, "Follow the lanterns, don't stray." I figured it was some eccentric landowner's idea of a landmark. I arrived at dawn. The sky, a dull gray that seemed to press down on the forest. The coordinates led to a break in the trees, where a narrow path snaked into the woods. The Lantern Road was exactly as the photos showed. A rutted dirt track, barely wide enough for my Jeep, flanked by ancient lanterns every 50 feet or so. They were old, maybe a century, their metal pitted with rust, their glass clouded with age. None of them were lit, but they gave off a faint glow, like they'd soaked up the last light of the sun. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp moss and something sharper, like ozone after a storm. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth, and the silence was absolute tenno birds, no rustle of leaves, just my own breathing, loud in my ears. I slung my survey gear over my shoulder and started walking, GPS in hand, marking the path's boundaries. The lanterns were my guide, their eerie glow cutting through the morning fog. At first, it was routine. Measure distances, note elevations, snap photos. But the deeper I went, the more the road felt alive. The lanterns seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, their positions slightly off from where I'd marked them. My GPS flickered, the screen glitching, showing me miles from where I knew I was. I chalked it up to bad reception, but my skin prickled like I was being watched from the trees. By noon, I'd gone maybe a mile when I found the first anomaly. A lantern, unlike the others, was pristine, its glass clear, its frame gleaming as if polished. It hung from a gnarled oak, and inside it burned a flame, small but steady, casting a warm, golden light. I stopped, my breath catching. There was no fuel source, no wick, just a flame floating in the air. I reached out, my fingers inches from the glass, and felt a pulse, like a heartbeat, thrumming through the lantern. My head swam, a low hum filling my mind. Not a sound, but a sensation, like static crawling under my skull. I backed away, my heart pounding, and kept going, telling myself it was just fatigue, a trick of the light. The road grew stranger the further I walked. The lanterns multiplied, clustering closer together, their glow brighter, almost blinding in the dim forest. The trees leaned inward, their branches knitting together overhead, forming a tunnel of green and shadow. The air grew colder, the ozone smell stronger, stinging my nose. I started hearing things whispers, not words, but fragments, like half-remembered conversations. They came from the lanterns, their flames flickering in time with the sounds. Caleb, stay, see. My name, woven into the murmurs, made my stomach lurch. I checked my GPS again, but it was useless, the screen frozen on a blank grid. I don't know when I noticed the footprints. They were in the dirt beside the path, faint but clear, matching the tread of my boots. But I hadn't walked there. I'd stayed on the road, following the client's instructions. Don't stray. The prints led into the trees, disappearing into the underbrush. I told myself it was another hiker, maybe a hunter, but the forest was too quiet, too empty. I kept moving, faster now, my survey notes forgotten. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the lantern's flames pulsed, their light strobing in a way that made my head throb. At dusk, I reached a clearing. The road ended abruptly, the lanterns forming a circle around a patch of bare earth. In the center stood a single lantern, larger than the others, its flame a deep, unnatural blue. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt, and the hum in my head became a chorus, a cacophony of voices calling my name. I dropped my gear, my hands shaking, and approached the lantern. Up close, I saw it wasn't empty. Inside the flame, shapes moved, faces, distorted and fleeting, their mouths open in silent screams. I recognized one, impossibly. My father, who died when I was a kid, his eyes wide with terror. I stumbled back, my breath ragged, and that's when I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the clearing, her face hidden in shadow. She wore a long coat, tattered and gray, and her hands were clasped in front of her, holding something I couldn't see. The whispers stopped, the air still, as she stepped forward. Her voice was soft, almost tender, but it carried a weight that made my knees buckle. "You followed the lanterns," she said. "You always do." I tried to speak, to ask who she was, what this place was, but my throat was dry, my words stuck. She moved closer, her face still obscured, and I saw what she held. A lantern, identical to the one in the center, its flame blue and writhing. "They want to show you," she said, her voice curling into my thoughts. "Look." I didn't want to, but my eyes were drawn to the flame. The faces were clearer, now men, women, children, their expressions shifting from fear to anguish to something like ecstasy. And then I saw myself, my face in the flame, my mouth open, my eyes empty. The hum surged, filling my skull, and I felt Oedipal like a tide dragging me under. The woman's hand touched my shoulder, cold and heavy, and she whispered, Join us. I don't know how I broke free. One moment, I was staring into the flame. The next, I was running, the lantern's light blurring past me. The road seemed to twist, the path looping back on itself. The lanterns multiplying, their flames roaring now, a wall of fire and sound. The whispers screamed my name, and the woman's voice was everywhere, soft and relentless. You can't leave. You're already here. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept running, the forest a maze of shadows and light. I woke in my Jeep, parked at the edge of the highway, my clothes soaked with sweat, my gear gone. The sun was high, the forest silent again. My GPS was blank, its memory wiped, and my phone showed no signal, no record of the photos I'd taken. I drove back to Bangor, not stopping until I reached my apartment. I told Karen I'd gotten sick, couldn't finish the job. She didn't push, but her voice was strange, distant, like she knew I was lying. I tried to forget the lantern road, but it's in me now. At night, I hear the hum, faint but growing, and I see the lanterns in my dreams, their flames flickering behind my eyes. I've found scratches on my arms, thin and precise, like they were carved by something sharp and deliberate. Last week, I found a lantern on my doorstep, small and rusted, its flame burning softly. I didn't touch it, but I heard her voice, the woman's whispering from inside, "He'll come back." I've moved twice since then, but the hum follows and the lanterns keep appearing in my porch, in my car, outside my window. I don't know what they are or what they want, but I know they're not done with me. If you're ever in Maine, if you see a dirt road lined with lanterns, don't follow them. Don't look at the flames. Because once you do, the road doesn't let you go. The hollow bell. The bell rang at 3:17 a.m. A single low chime that echoed through the empty streets of Coldwater, Montana, and woke me from a dead sleep. I'm Theo Grant, a mechanic by trade. Not the kind of guy who spooks easily, but that sound it wasn't right. It came from the old church at the edge of town, a sagging relic no one stepped foot in since the 80s. The bell shouldn't have rung. Its clapper was long gone, stolen, or rusted away, and the church was boarded up, left to rot in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, waiting for another chime. It didn't come. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the town was holding its breath. Coldwater's the kind of place where nothing happens. A gas station, a diner, a handful of houses, and a population you can count on both hands. I'd moved here 2 years ago, running from a bad breakup and a worse debt, figuring a nowhere town was the perfect place to disappear. But that night, the bell's chime stuck with me, a splinter in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling it was calling me. The next morning, I drove to the church, my pickup rattling over the frost-cracked road. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and wet earth, with a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. The church loomed ahead, its steeple leaning slightly, like it was tired of standing. The windows were boarded, the paint peeling in long gray strips, and the door was padlocked, though the chain was rusted, brittle. I walked the perimeter, my boots crunching on frozen grass, looking for signs of a prank kids, maybe, or some drunk messing around. Nothing. Just the bell tower, its silhouette stark against the gray sky, and that uneasy feeling like eyes watching from the shadows. I stopped at Mabel's diner for coffee, hoping to shake off the chill. Mabel, a wiry woman with eyes like a hawk, poured me a cup and leaned on the counter. "Heard the bell last night," she said, not asking, just stating it like fact. "You check it out?" "Yeah," I said, sipping the bitter brew. "Nothing up there. You know what's with that bell?" Her face tightened, her fingers drumming on the counter. "Folks say it rings when someone's marked." Old story, not worth repeating. She turned away, busying herself with a coffee pot, but I caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. I pressed her, but she clammed up, and the other regular sand old man, named Gus, and a trucker passing through weren't any help. Gus just muttered about bad winters and went back to his eggs. The trucker shrugged, his eyes darting nervously. "Heard it too, huh? Stay away from that place, Theo. Ain't nothing good comes from messing with that bell." I drove back home, the diner's warmth fading as the cold crept back into my bones. Mabel's words, someone's mark echoed in my head, and I couldn't help but wonder who. The town felt different now, the silence heavier, the shadows longer. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of the bell's chime lingered, low and mournful, like a warning I didn't understand. Around midnight, I heard another sound of faint scratching, like nails on wood, coming from my front door. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept to the living room, my pulse racing. The scratching stopped as I approached, but when I opened the door, there was nothing. Just a single mark on the frame, a thin, deliberate scratch, like someone had dragged a knife across it. The next day, I went back to the church, this time with tools. The padlock on the door gave way with a quick pry, and I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the sour smell of decay. The pews were splintered, the hymnals moldy, their pages stuck together. I climbed the rickety stairs to the bell tower, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The bell was there, massive and tarnished, its surface etched with strange symbol spirals, jagged lines, shapes that seemed to shift when I looked too long. There was no clapper, just as I'd thought, but the inside of the bell was smooth, polished, like it had been cleaned recently. On the floor beneath it was a small pile of ash, still warm, smelling faintly of something sweet and rotten. I took photos, my hands shaking, and sent them to a friend, an amateur historian named Rachel. She called me an hour later, her voice tight. "Those symbols aren't random, Theo. They're old, pre-Christian, maybe older. Found on stones around here, tied to stories about the land choosing people. The bell, it's not just a bell, it's a signal. You need to leave." I laughed it off, told her she'd been reading too many ghost stories. But that night, the bell rang again. 3:17 a.m., one chime, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. I didn't go back to the church. Instead, I searched the house, looking for more scratches. I found them on the windowsills, the back door, even the mirror in my bathroom. Each one was identical, precise, like a signature. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I went to the town library, a cramped room in the community center with books older than me. I dug through local history, finding scraps about Coldwater's past. The church was built in 1883 on land the native tribes avoided, calling it hollow ground. There were stories of disappearance as loggers, settlers, kids going back centuries, all linked to the church, all after the bell rang. The most recent was a hunter, vanished last spring, his rifle found under the bell, surrounded by ash. The article called it a suicide, but the details didn't add up. No body, no note, just the ash and those same strange symbols carved into the stock of his gun. I started noticing things in town. The way people avoided my eyes, the way conversations stopped when I walked into the diner. Gus, the old man, cornered me outside the gas station, his breath sour with whiskey. "You heard it twice now," he said, his voice low. "It don't ring for everyone. You stay, it'll ring again." And then he trailed off, his hands trembling, and walked away. That night, the scratching came again. Louder, more insistent, moving from the door to the walls, like something circling the house. I turned on every light, checked every window, but saw nothing. Just more scratches, deeper now, some forming patterns that matched the symbols on the bell. I called Rachel again, and she sent me a scanned page from an old journal written by a preacher in 1890. He described the bell ringing on its own, calling people to the church where they'd join the hollow. He wrote of a presence in the ground, something that listened and chose, something that fed on those who answered its call. His last entry was a single line, "It knows my name." I decided to leave, packed a bag, filled my truck with gas, and planned to drive to Missoula by dawn. But the bell rang again, 3:17 a.m., and this time, the scratching was inside the house. I grabbed my bat, my flashlight, and searched every room. Nothing. But the mirror in my bathroom was uncovered, and in it my reflection wasn't right. My face, but not my expression. My mouth was moving, whispering words I couldn't hear, my eyes too dark, too empty. I smashed the mirror, the glass shattering, but the whispering didn't stop. It was in my head now, my name over and over, "Theo, come." I drove to the church, not knowing why, only that I had to. The door was open, the padlock gone. Inside, the air was cold, thick with that sweet rotten smell. The bell tower was lit, not by my flashlight, but by a faint glow from the bell itself. its symbols pulsing with a sickly light. I climbed the stairs, my legs heavy, like wading through water. The bell was ringing, not a chime, but a low, continuous hum, vibrating in my bones. Beneath it, the ash pile was larger, and in it, I saw fragments bone, cloth, a watch with a cracked face, stopped at 3:17. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the bell, the hum filling my mind, drowning out my thoughts. Faces appeared in the shadows, people I didn't know, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in sync with the hum. They weren't there, not really, but I felt them, their presence pressing against me, urging me to stay. I saw my own face among them, not a reflection, but me, standing in the tower, my hands covered in ash. I ran. The road out of Coldwater was empty, the mountains looming like sentinels. My truck's engine sputtered, but I kept driving, the hum fading but never gone. I'm in Missoula now, crashing in a cheap motel, but the scratches keep appearing on my door, my car, my skin. They're faint, but they're there, forming those same symbols. The bell's hum follows me, a whisper in my dreams, calling me back. Last night, I found ash on my pillow, warm and sweet-smelling, and a note in my own handwriting, "Come to the hollow." I don't know what the bell is, or what lives in Coldwater's ground, but it knows me, it chose me, and it's waiting. If you're ever in Montana, if you hear a bell at 3:17 a.m., don't listen. Don't go to the church. Because once the hollow calls your name, it never stops. The Silent Ward. The scream woke me at 2:43 a.m. It wasn't Humanot exactly, but it cut through the stillness of Haven's End, a speck of a town in northern Wisconsin, like a blade through silk. I'm Avery Cole, a night shift nurse at St. Agnes Hospital, a crumbling brick building on the edge of town that should have been shut down years ago. The scream came from the third floor, the locked ward no one talks about, the one we call the silent ward because its patients never speak. I was alone at the nurse's station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, when that sound hit me, raw and jagged, like something tearing itself apart. I froze, my pen hovering over a chart, my heart slamming against my ribs. The hospital was quiet again, but the air felt wrong thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Heaven's End is a nowhere place, a cluster of sagging houses and a diner that smells of grease and despair, nestled in a valley where the pines grow too tall and the winters last too long. St. Agnes is the town's lifeline, the only hospital for miles, but it's a relic: leaky pipes, flickering lights, and a smell of antiseptic that can't mask the rot underneath. I'd taken the job 6 months ago, desperate for work, after a messy divorce, left me with nothing but debt and a car that barely ran. The night shift suited me. I liked the quiet, the way the world felt softer in the dark. But the silent ward, room 317, was different. It was off limits, its door always locked, its charts missing from the system. The other nurses whispered about it, stories of patients who didn't exist, of sounds no one could explain, but I'd never heard anything myself. Until that scream. I checked the monitors, my hands trembling. The third floor was dark, the cameras glitchy, showing only static where room 317 should have been. I radioed security, but Ed, the guard, was out back smoking, his voice crackling through the static. "Probably just pipes, Avery. Old place creaks like hell." I wanted to believe him, but pipes don't scream. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the stairwell, the air growing colder with each step. The hospital smelled of bleach and something sweeter, like overripe fruit, faint but persistent. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, the sound too loud in the silence. The third floor was a maze of locked doors and abandoned rooms, the air stale, the walls stained with watermarks that looked like faces if you stared too long. Room 317 was at the end of the hall, its door different from the other steel, not wood, with a keypad instead of a lock. I'd never seen it open, never seen a doctor or nurse go in. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. Nothing. Just the hum of the hospital, the distant drip of a faucet. Then, a faint scratching like nails on metal, slow and deliberate, coming from inside. I backed away, my flashlight beam shaking, and noticed something new, a small symbol carved into the doorframe, a spiral with jagged edges. like a wound. It hadn't been there yesterday. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. The scream stayed with me, looping in my head, and that symbol burned behind my eye. I drove to the diner, the only place open at 6 a.m., and asked Margie, the waitress, about the hospital. She'd lived in Haven's End her whole life, her face lined like old leather. "St. Agnes ain't right," she said, pouring me coffee that tasted like tar. "Built on bad land. Folks used to say the ground there listens." She wouldn't say more, just shook her head and muttered about keeping your distance. I couldn't let it go. That afternoon, I went to the town library, a cramped room in the community center with books that smelled of mildew. I found a history of Haven's End, a thin volume from the 70s. St. Agnes was built in 1910 on land donated by a reclusive family, the Harts, who'd vanished by 1920. There were stories of strange illnesses, patients who went mad, doctors who quit without explanation. The silent ward was mentioned once, in a footnote: room 317, reserved for special cases, closed to staff. No details, just a warning: do not enter without clearance. The book also mentioned the symbol I'd seen, warding mark, tied to old stories about the land choosing people to speak for it. Back at the hospital that night, the air felt heavier, the lights dimmer. I checked the third-floor cameras again, but they were still static, a gray snowstorm where room 317 should be. I avoided the ward, sticking to my rounds, but the scratching started again, louder, coming through the walls. Patients complained of nightmare shadows in their rooms, voices whispering their names. Mrs. Keller, an elderly woman in room 204, grabbed my arm as I adjusted her for. "It's singing," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Up there, in the quiet place. Don't listen, Avery." I brushed it off, told her it was the meds, but her words stuck with me, a cold knot in my stomach. Around 2 a.m., I found a note on the nurse's station, slipped under a chart. It was in my handwriting, but I hadn't written it. "Go to 317. It's waiting." My blood ran cold. I tore the note up, my hands shaking, and threw it in the trash. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent, and the lights flickered, plunging the hall into darkness for a split second. When they came back on, the trash can was empty, the note gone. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took the stairs to the third floor, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The hall was colder than before, the air thick with that sweet, rotten smell. The symbol on room 317's door was deeper now, the spiral glistening like it was wet. I tried the keypad, punching in random codes, but it wouldn't budge. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low hum, like a choir tuning up, coming from inside. "My name?" whispered soft and slow. "Avery, come." I backed away, my heart hammering, and ran back to the station. I called Ed, but his radio was off. I tried the hospital's main line, but it was dead, just static and a faint hum that matched the one in my head. I searched the records room, looking for anything on room 317. Most of the files were missing, but I found a locked drawer in the back, its key taped under the desk. Inside was a single folder labeled Ward 317 Restricted. It held patient logs, but the names were redacted, replaced with numbers. Patient 12, admitted 1,943, non-responsive, transferred to 317. Disappeared. Patient 27, admitted 1,968, heard voices, transferred to 317. No record of discharge. Dozens of entries, all the Semino outcomes, just gone. The last page was a photo, grainy and old, showing a nurse standing in front of room 317's door, her face blurred, the spiral symbol carved into her hand. I didn't sleep after my shift. I drove to Missoula, to a friend's house, needing distance, needing answers. Rachel, my historian friend, met me at a coffee shop, her laptop open to scans of old documents. "St. Agnes was a dumping ground," she said, her voice low. "People who didn't fit mental cases, drifters, anyone the town didn't want, they sent them to 317. No one came back. The Harts, the family who built it, they believed the land was alive, that it needed voices to speak through. That symbol you saw, it's in their journals. They called it a key." I told her about the scream, the hum, the note. Her face paled. Get out of Haven's End, Avery. That place, it's not just haunted, it's hungry. I went back, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stay away. The hum was in me now, a constant drone, pulling me back to the hospital. That night, the third floor was different. The lights were out, the hall lit only by a faint glow from under room 317's door. The scratching was gone, but the hum was louder, a song without words weaving through my thoughts. I found another note on the station, in my handwriting again. Open the door. This time, I didn't tear it up. I walked to room 317, my flashlight trembling, the spiral symbol glowing faintly, like it was alive. The keypad beeped, accepting a code I didn't know 243, the time I'd heard the scream. The door clicked open, revealing a room that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a hospital room, no bed, no equipment, just a bare concrete floor and walls covered in spirals, hundreds of them pulsing with that same sickly light. In the center was a hole, a jagged pit in the floor, the hum pouring out of it like a living thing. I saw shapes in the dark faces, hands, eyes watching me, their mouths moving, singing my name. I don't know how long I stood there, the hum filling my mind, drowning out everything. I saw myself in the pit, my face among the others, my voice joining the song. A hand touched my shoulder, cold and heavy, and a voice whispered, "You're home." It wasn't human, not anymore, but it knew me, knew everything about me. I screamed, or thought I did, and ran, the door slamming shut behind me. I left Haven's End that morning, my car packed with what little I owned. I'm in Minneapolis now, crashing on Rachel's couch, but the hum follows me. It's quieter, but it's there, in my dreams, in the silence between heartbeats. I find spirals everywhere on my apartment door, in the margins of my notebooks, etched into my skin when I wake up. Last night, I found a chart in my bag, one I didn't write. Patient 84, Avery Cole, admitted to 317, singing, "I don't know what lives in St. Agnes, or what it wants, but it's not done with me." If you're ever in Haven's End, if you hear a scream at 2:43 a.m., don't go to the third floor. Don't open the door. Because once the silent word calls you, it never lets you go. The door at the end of the hall. The knocking woke me at 3:13 a.m. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and slow, coming from the door at the end of the hall in my new apartment in Black Hollow, Vermont. I'm Riley Kane, a graphic designer who'd fled Boston after a burnout left me hollowed out, chasing cheap rent and solitude in a town so small it barely registered on a map. The apartment was a Stila second-floor flat in a sagging Victorian house, its paint peeling like old skin, its windows rattling in the October wind. The landlord, a wiry man named Mr. Harrow, had handed me the keys with a warning, "Don't bother with the door at the end of the hall. It's locked. Always has been." I'd nodded, too tired to care, but that night, the knocking changed everything. The sound wasn't loud, but it was wrong too, precise, too measured, like someone was testing the door's strength. I lay in bed, my heart thudding, staring at the ceiling where shadows danced in the moonlight. The apartment was quiet otherwise, the kind of quiet that feels alive, pressing against your eardrums. I waited, breath held, for another knock. Nothing. Just the faint creak of the old house settling, or so I told myself. But sleep wouldn't come. The air felt thick, heavy with the smell of dust and something sharper, like wet iron. I got up, my bare feet cold on the hardwood, and crept to the hallway. The hall was narrow, its wallpaper faded to a sickly yellow, curling at the edges. At the far end, maybe 20 feet away, was the door Mr. Harrow had mentioned, plain wood, no knob, just a rusted keyhole and a faint crack running down its center. I'd barely noticed it when I moved in, assuming it led to storage or a sealed-off room. Now, it seemed to loom, the shadows around it deeper, almost liquid. I stood there, my phone's flashlight casting a weak beam, and listened. No knocking, no sound, just the hum of my own pulse. But as I turned away, I saw a faint scratch on the doorframe, thin and jagged, like a claw mark. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrow, my voice shaky as I asked about the door. "Told you, don't bother with it," he snapped, his tone clipped. "Old house, old quirks. Leave it be." He hung up before I could press him. I tried to focus on work, setting up my laptop in the cramped living room, but my eyes kept drifting to the hall. The scratch was still there, deeper than I'd thought, and beside it was another, fresher,